Hello everybody, welcome to 2026, and welcome to another Deltarune theory video. Today we will be talking about Gaster's list, which is a prevalent theory within the Deltarune community, as well as the roots theory by GoldPro. Concerning the view count, I imagine most of you already seen this video, but if you haven't, I will be referencing some of the ideas from it. At the end of the video, GoldPro says you could go a lot farther with this idea, but I'm not too confident in, being able to actually predict that stuff. Well, I say that crazy kind of stuff all the time, so I am okay with saying that crazy, unpredictable kind of stuff. And yes, it's mostly this video is based on an idea I had when I watched this video originally, as well as trying to tie into how Gaster's list could actually work, because I do have some problems with it, and I want to talk about that as well. So, that is this video. Let's start with what is Gaster's list. So, Gaster's list is the name for a theory that basically says that at the beginning of the game of Deltarune, when you're in the Goner Maker sequence, if you input certain names when the game gives you the option to, you can get a response from Gaster. Now, other than the name Gaster, which resets the game, the names on the list are Chris, Susie, Noelle, Birdly, Jockington, Caddy with an I, Caddy with a Y, Bratty, Sans, Papyrus, Undyne, Alphys, Toriel, Asgore, Asriel, Rudy, Gerson, and QC. The prevailing theory is that each of these names of characters in the list are within the list because they will be important in Deltarune's story, and more recently, the additional little quirk that each of these characters will be entering a dark world at some point, given that, we already have seen Birdly, Chris, Susie, Noelle, Gerson, Asgore, Toriel, and Undyne enter a dark world. That's a good portion of the list. Not, 50-50 yet, but we're getting there. It's a fairly reasonable idea, right? Come on. It's a list of names. Surely these specific characters will be important, right? Otherwise, why have them included here? Even characters who seem less important, like Caddy and Bratty, have a little mini storyline going on throughout Deltarune, which could pay off in a dark world. Alphys, Undyne is now missing, so her little storyline of connecting with Undyne in this universe has now been disrupted, so potentially she could have something going on. Probably the least important of all of these characters so far, other than maybe Papyrus, but obviously we have an attachment to him from Undertale, is QC, who is the cafe owner in Hometown, the Purple Bunny, of course. QC didn't really have a name in Undertale, although she did exist there and ran the inn in Snowdin. And now she does, which really implies she's going to be more important, but how? There hasn't been a subplot with QC in Deltarune like all of these other characters. Well, except for the thing where going to the cafe as Chris will get you little nuggets of information about Asriel and the past. So maybe there's something there, perhaps? Like I said, I do have some problems with this idea, though. One of them is that there was an original list in Undertale. Undertale had this exact same little subset of Easter eggs. If you put in any of the main characters' names in Undertale, you would get a response from them. Gaster's name would also reset the game, and of course you could enter hard mode as well by putting in, the true name. In the original list, there are also names of less important characters, like Aaron. Aaron never ends up being super important later in Undertale. He's kind of funny, but that's about it. And his name was in this original list. So, if one wanted to, like me, per se, they could say that, this is just that again. It's just now with some Deltarune characters included that have some importance to the game, like they're recognizable, But that doesn't mean they're going to be in a dark world necessarily, or a main player in the plot, right? Because you'd think if this was a list of characters that would have been important players in Deltarune's plot, that Carol and Des would have their names on this list, right? I mean, even if Des isn't the knight, Des is still very important to the world of Deltarune, and Carol has also proven herself to be an important character that is probably going to play a role in the coming chapters. So why wouldn't their names be included on the list? Even if you don't believe that Carol has ever entered a dark world, based on the text from the unused person in the code, the unused text, they talk about a nightmare about entering a dark room and the door closing behind them, which is exactly what happens to Chris and Susie in Chapter 1 when they enter the dark world, which heavily implies whoever unused is in the text, which is almost certainly Des, has entered the dark world before. So surely Des should be on the list, right? Now, there is a reason they wouldn't be on the list practically, and that's because both Carol and Des's names are meant to be hidden from the player when they start the game. We are slowly getting pieces of, information about Des as the game goes on, but if you could just data mine the game and see during Chapter 1 that Des is one of these important characters, it would kind of blow a big hole in, the intrigue of the coming chapters. And Carol, I mean, her theme is just called C. So clearly, for some reason, Toby wants to hide her name from us. And I'm not really sure why, to be honest. Maybe it just makes her more intimidating before we actually meet her. But yes, Carol's name is also purposefully hidden from the player. So it does kind of make sense for her to have her name excluded from this list of character names. Although that does kind of shoot a little bit of a hole into the theory that these are all the important characters that will enter Dark Worlds or be important to the narrative of Deltarune, if two of the most important characters in the narrative aren't on the list specifically because they're so important that Toby doesn't want to spoil them, right? Number 3, Gerson. So in this picture, you can see I have Gerson put on the side of characters we have seen in Dark Worlds, because of course we saw Gerson in Chapter 4's Dark World, right? Well, kind of. The old man, who is only ever referred to as Old Man, that we see in Chapter 4's Dark World is a darkener made from memories of Gerson, right? That's how Ralsei describes it. So, yeah, he's basically Gerson, but he's not, literally Gerson, right? So should that really count for the list? Probably. I mean, how else would Gerson enter a dark world if he's dead? But, it also adds a little scruple to this being so straightforward and obvious, you know what I mean? And finally, the Roaring. The Roaring is basically a dark world swallowing the entire town of Hometown, and it's almost assuredly going to happen during the story of Deltarune. So shouldn't everybody in Hometown's name be on this list? Because they're all going to enter a dark world during the Roaring? No? Okay, so then we have to conclude that the Roaring doesn't count. So, from looking at these things, in order for this to make sense, Carol and Des have to be off the list for some reason, which doesn't necessarily make sense. The old man has to count for Gerson, and the Roaring has to not count. Using those stipulations, I think I can actually still come up with something rather compelling, though. And in fact, because of these contradictions, I think we can maybe figure out what this supposed list of important characters might actually be talking about. And that's when we get to Roots. So I'm going to give you the briefest of rundowns on Roots, because I'm assuming you just went and watched the video, or have watched it before, and I'm just going to be reminding you of it. But the basic idea is that this section of the Mantle game in Chapter 3, the true Dragon Blazer-styled freedom game where you can kill the enemies, this is also foreshadowing for the Weird Route, just like the board previously was, where you had the White Cloak, right? And that this one is going to be foreshadowing Chapter 5's Dark World specifically. within Gold Pro's video, the idea is essentially that in Chapter 5, we are going to be visiting multiple Dark Worlds, or somehow the town of Hometown itself is going to become a Dark World. And because the festival has flowers being put up all over the place, that will fulfill what Gerson says Chapter 5 will be like, which is the field of pink and gold, garden charred in an inferno of jealousy, right? That Hometown will literally become a garden because Asgore's flowers are going to be everywhere, and that will be what Chapter 5's Dark World is, more or less. The problem with that for me is, once again, wouldn't that mean everybody is going to enter the Dark World, right? And moreover, if that were the case, or even if, I've heard different variations of this idea as well, that Chapter 5 is going to be Dark World set in multiple buildings across Hometown, and we have to traverse to each of them, and that Asgore's just going to be like the first one. Again, if that is the case, does it really make sense for Gaster's list to only include these characters? And does it really make sense that this page from the sweepstakes has been revealed to us? So let me explain what we've got on this page, in case you don't know or don't remember. One is the Forbidden Path began with ice magic, and that's just to remind us that Chapter 3 tells us about how to do the weird route in Chapter 2, and then, the next board for roots might tell us what to do in Chapter 5. In the Spanthian Sweepstakes, there is a page where you can find 5 numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it is widely believed, and really only makes sense, that these 5 numbers relate to the weird route in chapters 1 through 5 of Deltarune. In chapter 1, there's no weird route, so it is small, and in fact, it is in black text, so you can't see it unless you highlight it like I have for this screenshot. Number 2's is a huge 2, because obviously in chapter 2, we are able to wield Noel as a weapon, essentially, to Snowgrave Birdley, and it has real-world lasting consequences. In Chapter 3, the number is invisible, and yet it's just as big as Chapter 2. And this is probably because the Shadow Mantle and the Shadow Crystal that you can only really get with the Mantle. I mean, if you're crazy, you can get it without the Mantle, but most people can really only get it with the Mantle, is going to be important for the Weird Route, as well as maybe the fact that the Mantle game foreshadows how to do Chapter 5's Weird Route, as well as Chapter 2's, right? 4's is not as small as 1's, but it is visible. And it's, it's there. And this is probably because, we don't really do much in Chapter 4 for the Weird Route. We get that cutscene with Chris kicking the heart, I guess. But mostly we're just undoing Chris trying to stop us from doing the Weird Route. So it's not a huge deal. Chapter 5, however, is more or less a midway in size between Chapter 4 and Chapter 3 and 2. So it's not quite as big a deal as Chapter 2 and 3, but it's still pretty big. And to me, this means 2 things. One, the idea I've seen floating around that Chapter 5 might be the end of the game in the Weird Route, like the Weird Route is going to essentially end the Deltarune universe at Chapter 5 instead of continuing on to Chapter 7, doesn't really make sense, because that 5 would be huge if that was the case, right? And 2, there's no way that Chapter 5 can have Weird Route content that is halfway as important as Chapter 2 if we are going to multiple people's houses. If even a fraction of the people on Gaster's list are going to show up as characters in the Dark World that we have the opportunity to Snowgrave, that is going to cause major changes to the Light World and the story of Deltarune that small little 5 cannot possibly encompass. If even just QC, Caddy, and Bratty got Snowgraved, that is way bigger than just Birdley, right? Oh, Birdley going to the hospital, that's one thing. But now if 3 other people, one of them an adult, I mean, Caddy and Bratty are technically adults too, but, they're young adults. If the cafe owner suddenly comes down with the same thing as Birdley, this is going to be like, there's some sort of mysterious disease we don't understand going around Hometown. That would cause major ripples throughout the town, I'm sure. They'd be going crazy. So yeah, I do think it is basically impossible that Chapter 5's Dark World could happen with actual characters from the Light World that we actually will have the chance to Snowgrave. Now, in GoldPro's video, I think this is somewhat subverted by the idea that Chapter 5 will not have Noelle as a part of it, or Chapter 5 won't focus on Noelle using Snowgrave. It'll instead be about training Chris to be stronger. Which, I mean, it kind of makes sense, because the White Cloak doesn't follow you into the board that we've been talking about this whole time. My problem is, I still don't think it really works. You see, when you click on each of these numbers, you get a little audio file that plays. For Chapter 2, it's d.og. Well, a snippet of it, which is what plays right before you fight Birdly. In Chapter 3's, it's the sound effect for the Shadow Mantle. It's called ma.mp3. And that is, of course, related to the Shadow Mantle, which you get in Chapter 3. So this presumably means that, okay, the result of Chapter 2's Weird Route is Birdly, right? The result of Chapter 3's Weird Route is getting the Shadow Mantle. When you click on Chapter 4, you get the red dot, which you can see if you try to think about Noelle in Chapter 4's Dark World after doing the whole Snowgrave thing by re-equipping the Thorn Ring. So, of course, the consequence of Chapter 4's Weird Route is Noelle has the Thorn Ring back. So the consequence of Chapter 5's Weird Route should be h.mp3, which is, I'll play it for you right now. It's the hometown theme slowed down. And within Undertale and Deltarune, when a song gets slowed down, that means people have been dying. And like I just said, it doesn't really make sense that people would be dying in real hometown, right? That would cause a way bigger effect if one person dying causes Chapter 2, well, okay, Birdly's not technically dead, but Snowgraving, causes Chapter 2's to be huge, then Chapter 5 should be 3 times the size of Chapter 2 if 3 people are going to get snowgraved. Even if it's just Asgore, it should be at least the same size, right? So I just don't think it really works. And moreover, there's a hanging thread that I think could tie into Roots in a way that isn't touched on in GoldPro's video, which is the concept of basements. In Chapter 4, when Susie and Noelle are talking with the lights out, Noelle mentions, "You know what really made me afraid of basements? Like the underground levels from Dragon Blazers. The music just repeats over and over again." And we see that in the Dark Worlds of Deltarune. Card Castle's basement has repetitive creepy music. Obviously, Bit Roots, where we fight Spamton Neo, the basement of Queen's Mansion, also has repetitive, scary music, and that music is remixed for the basement area in the Mantle game. So, given that we know Dragon Blazers is based on the Prophecy now, and we've been talking about these repetitive underground music tracks, and basements all tied together, what if there were a basement where we could get an underground level that could somehow tie into Hometown and Roots as a concept? And to that, I present to you New Hometown. So, what is Asgore known for in the world of Undertale, aside from murdering children? Well, he moved the monsters from the ruins, which used to be called Home, very creative, to a new place where they built a new city that looks basically exactly like the ruins, except now it's grayscale, called New Home. And in fact, it's sort of brought attention to that Home and New Home are identical copies of each other in the 10th anniversary livestream. I talked about that in my 10th anniversary livestream video, in fact. So what if in Chapter 5 of Deltarune, we'll find that a Dark World has been created in Asgore's flower shop, but that there is a basement in Asgore's flower shop. In fact, we already know there is. If you read the text on screen right now, it says, "The back door is blocked. You can only see through the basement window. A corkboard is covered with tons of papers and documents litter the floor." Now, I actually didn't really think about it this way. For some reason, Asgore's shop, Flower King, it's got those two staircases in the back of the room. My brain always just thought, okay, there's staircases that are going up to a second floor where Asgore lives. But it's also quite likely they're going down, right? But of course, we don't see documents lying all over the floor in Asgore's room in Chapter 1. But there is a big locked door. So perhaps that's where he's keeping his corkboard covered with tons of papers and documents. And, as we know, dark worlds are often held behind double doors. So, if there was a dark world created in Asgore's Flower King, you'd expect it to be there, in the basement, with the corkboard covered in documents. And what are these documents about? Oh yes, it is Des's disappearance, right? That's what Asgore and Carol are trying to solve. So you could say they're pieces of evidence. They are potentially taken from places all over town. Maybe statements from people who live in town. Articles of clothing or evidence that might have been left behind. All of this could come together to create, as a dark world, a remixed version of Hometown, full of the people that Asgore suspects know something about Des's disappearance, or are somehow involved in the case of Des's disappearance. And that's where we return to Roots. So, obviously, when Goldpro tries to line up Roots with Hometown, it sort of works, but there are some weird changes, and we can quite easily explain that as, the thing Gerson says. A story can be retold, things can be changed, right? That new Hometown is a flawed reflection of real Hometown. If that could be true, it would knock off so many characters that are on Gaster's list in a way that would not be too serious if we try to, murder them. These aren't actually Caddy and Bratty. They are representations of Caddy and Bratty, perhaps as they used to be back when Des was still in town, through the lens of Asgore creating this dark world, right? They are much like Old Man Gerson is. Not literally Gerson, but basically Gerson. Do you see why I had to go through all these hoops to justify this? Anyway, let me talk about my interpretations of each of the sprites in Roots, because they differ a little bit from Goldpro's, and then I will go to my conclusion. So, I do think the pink singing cat and the white sort of sentinels that surround it and only attack after the pink cat has been attacked are probably in reference to Caddy and Caddy. Two cat sisters, they look vaguely cat-like. Caddy sings in the choir. It makes decent sense. Below that, we see Toriel represented as the same creature. I'm a little bit iffy on this one. This one definitely feels less concrete than a lot of the others. But it would make sense for Toriel to be in this dark world, represented one way or another, considering, Asgore is the one creating it. So, sure, we'll slot Toriel in here. Maybe she isn't even, part of this foreshadowing section because, it'd be so obvious if you figured everything else out. To the left of Toriel, we see Alphys. I mean, this one is very concrete. Yellow lizards surrounding a grayscale fish. That's definitely meant to be Undyne, or at least a reference to her. So yeah, that's Alphys. I don't think this necessarily means that Undyne is going to have, two forms, an armored up form and a normal form, or, turn into a goner in this world or something. I think it's just meant to imply to us that this is, in fact, Alphys in a way that we will understand and be able to put together, right? Instead of just saying, well, it's a yellow lizard, so it could be Alphys, we see, oh, okay, it's a yellow lizard and a gray fish. It must be Alphys. Below Alphys, we have Asgore, who is like 100% supposed to be represented by this monster. It's a yellow dreamer-looking monster that shoots red spears surrounded by 7 flowers. It's definitely Asgore. Given we already know Asgore's going to be in this Dark World, it makes a lot of sense that he would be represented here. Yeah. This one's a little weird. The cyan lizards here, I have Jockington put here, and that's mostly because the green lizards could only really be a representation of Bratty if they're a representation of anyone. And if you wanted to represent both Bratty and Jockington, I guess the second color you would choose for Jockington would be blue, right? I mean, he is mostly blue, even though his body is green. His clothes are so blue, it covers most of his body. So I guess that tracks. This one's a little weak, but Bratty's is way stronger, so, you know. Bratty having flowers around her is interesting because, of course, she does have a crush on Azrael, or at least an implied one. So Azrael potentially being one of Asgore's flowers that he's tending to does make a lot of sense. In fact, if I were to delete Azrael and Toriel from this list, I think it would still make sense that the 7 flowers around Asgore represent the 7 family members from the Holiday Dreamer family. Because, you know, minus him, there's Toriel, Chris, Azrael, Rudy, Carol, Des, and Noelle. So, 7. I talked about that in my original Chapter 5 prediction video. That said, I do have Azrael on the board as this orange monster at the bottom, mostly just because of process of elimination. In the Chapter 5 prediction video I just mentioned, I linked the orange soul and orange flower with Chris, more likely, because, you know, Chris's element seems to be courage instead of determination. So that kind of goes along with the bravery soul and everything. Problem is, Chris can't shoot fire, and these monsters do. So it seems like the monster here should be related to fire somehow. It's like their one outstanding trait. And Azrael, of course, you know, can create fire, at least theoretically, so it kind of makes sense. Once again, I could definitely see Azrael just being represented by the flowers around Asgore, but then who would this be? I don't know. Maybe Rudy, but that also seems like a stretch. Then there's Undyne, represented by these blue fish. That's pretty obvious. I don't think I have to explain that. Off to the right, we have a room full of nondescript monsters. I believe, just like Gold Pro asserts in the video, that this is representative of the apartment buildings in Hometown, and these are just a bunch of fodder monsters for us to kill in the weird route, essentially. Just, you know, the random Hometown NPCs that we normally interact with, probably. I represented them with Snowy's dad for no particular reason, other than he was over by the apartments in one of the chapters. Now we get to the most controversial section, which is this intersection area here with all of the white sentinel cats that only wake up when you defeat one of the pink cats. I have this as the intersection in town where we have QC's diner, Sans' shop, the library, and the hospital. And I really only have it like that because it's an intersection, just like this room is, and it knocks off basically every other character on Gaster's list, right? It gives us a reason for QC to be in this dark world. It gives us a place for Rudy to be found in this dark world. It gives us a place for Sans to show up in this dark world. And it gives us a place for Gerson too. Although I feel like Gerson probably wouldn't. Maybe it would be a representation of Birdley. One way or the other. One of them's going to be there and the other isn't. I put Gerson here for a specific reason though. And that is, if we take all of these characters who would be in the root section, why would they be on Asgore's conspiracy board is something we have to think about, right? So what if Gaster's list is more like Asgore's list, or probably more likely Carol's list? It's a list of suspects in Des's disappearance, or at least a list of related people to Des's disappearance. This makes sense for characters like Asgore, Toriel, Rudy, Azrael, Chris, Noelle, and even Undyne, who was probably the deputy on the case. But it can also make sense for a lot of these other seemingly disconnected characters. For example, Gerson and Alphys were both teachers. We have no idea if Alphys ever taught Des and Asriel, because we really don't know when she arrived in town. All we know is that she replaced Gerson. So it is definitely assured that Des and Asriel had Gerson as a teacher at some point. And given Gerson's relationship with Susie in the Dark World, I think it's fairly understandable that Gerson could have had a similar mentorship relationship with Des before he died. And then, Alphys filling in that position, she could have potentially seen Des at school the day before she disappeared or something like that. QC also makes a lot more sense to be on this list because, as we know, and Asgore likes to remind us, the family used to go to the diner to get hot chocolate after church. So QC knows the Dreamer holiday families quite well, or at least, there's a connection there. So, if it happened on a Sunday, or even if it happened and they presumed that Des might have gone to the cafe before she disappeared, then QC could be an important witness. Similarly, we have Braddy and Caddy. Braddy and Caddy are the same age as Asriel and Des, so they were likely in the same class. Again, if this was on a school day, or even if it wasn't, the town's not that big, the idea that these two could have been witnesses and saw Des on that day isn't too crazy. Now, the ones that are a bit crazy are Susie, Birdley, Sans, and Jockington and Caddy with an I. These five seem like they wouldn't have anything to do with Des. Also, Papyrus is here. It's hard to say if Papyrus would have anything to do with Des, because we have no idea what Papyrus is doing. But let's go down the list from most to least likely. So, if we think that Caddy and Braddy could have seen Des on the day she disappeared, then the idea that Caddy with an I and Jockington might have been hanging around at the same place where Caddy with a Y was, considering Caddy and Caddy are siblings, it could make sense why they might be witnesses. Or, alternatively, there is a connection between Chris, Caddy, and Noelle. Like, Noelle and Caddy are friends, and of course Jockington likes to follow Caddy around, so it would make sense that Jockington was also there. Or Chris and Caddy have a connection through the whole, demon summoning dark magic thing that they keep talking about when we interact with Caddy. So maybe that was something they were doing on the day Des disappeared, and so because Chris is related to this case, that accidentally drags in Caddy with an I and Jockington. Similarly, Birdley could get dragged into being a witness in this case if Birdley and Noelle were friends all the way back then. It's kind of implied they weren't, I would argue, but even so, he could have still seen something. Birdley's a pretty nosy person. I would not be surprised if, especially, it would make sense for his bird inspirations for him to have seen something on that day. Now, the ones that really don't make sense are Susie, Papyrus, and Sans. After all, Sans and Papyrus have showed up in town recently, apparently, according to Sans in Chapter 1. And Susie also is the new girl, so she definitely hasn't met Des before. That said, we are given a concrete example of why Carol would distrust Susie. She is new in town, and, she's a bit rough around the edges, at least her reputation is. So perhaps Carol would have suspected her anyway, and that would have been before she snuck into her house and started touching Des's guitar. I feel like, if this list is going to be important going into Chapter 5 specifically, or, even just going into the future, the idea that what happens in Chapter 4 could have added Susie to the list, I don't think that's too crazy. It would make sense that they would suspect her. And the same is kind of also true of Sans and Papyrus. Now, these two came to town much more recently, but Sans also knows way too much, always. He's always letting on that he knows more than he should, right? So the idea that Carol, who has, been working on this for, years and years, would see this guy who shows up in town and starts acting like he knows everybody, and thinks, well, this guy's pretty suspicious. We should, investigate him and his mysterious reclusive brother, also isn't totally crazy, right? It's pretty out there, but I could see it. I could also see Asgore just saying, no, we gotta put Sans on the board because he's trying to get together with my wife, So that could also happen. But interestingly, this makes, to me, a lot more sense for what Gaster's list could be. And that is, it's kind of like a suspect list for people who saw Des before she disappeared and might be able to help us unravel the mystery of what happened to her. Obviously, it would give an explanation to why Des and Carol aren't on the list, because Asgore totally trusts that Carol isn't lying to him about not knowing where Des went. After all, why would she also have a conspiracy board if she already knew the whole time? Des obviously can't answer to Asgore why she disappeared, because she's disappeared. So it makes sense why both those names wouldn't be on his particular list, and maybe then wouldn't show up in this Dark World. Especially because, the one person that we never really talk about who is technically on Gaster's list as well is Gaster. Right? Gaster's name also elicits a response in the Gonermaker naming schemes. So Gaster, knowing what happened to Des, that definitely tracks. Let's just put it that way. This does bring up a question that you might have after looking at this little picture for as long as it's been on screen, which is, okay, that makes some sense, at least, for why all the people who are on Gaster's list might show up in this Dark World. But you also have Des here. And that's because this monster in the top right of this area is undoubtedly Des, in my opinion. I have the little sprite of the black deer beside her because within the same event that this black monster that follows your movements is, you can find in the files that it has an unused sprite, which is a black deer. Now, this is significant because the same thing can be observed with the white cloak. Underneath the white cloak sprite is a, tan, normal colored deer. And so we can presume that just like the white cloak is secretly Noel, that this black monster that follows your movements is secretly also a member of the Holiday family, and really it only makes sense for it to be Des. Because, Des's room door is black, and she was kind of the quote-unquote black sheep of her family, so her being a black deer does make sense. But why would Des be in this Dark World if she isn't, on the list? Well, because all of this is about her, right? Sure, she isn't literally named in Asgore's notes as a suspect or whatever, but we are piecemealing her together through all of these notes and pieces of evidence that Asgore has collected because we are trying to solve the mystery of her disappearance. So of course she would be here in some shape or form, maybe not like her actual self, right? Like it might be through the lens of the way Asgore sees her or through the way the town views her now. But I think she will be here in a way. And really that only makes sense because again, even if Des isn't the knight, she's clearly going to be important in the story of Deltarune. So for people who aren't crazy like you and me and are watching Deltarune theory videos on YouTube, there needs to be a great entry point into understanding Des's story. And we sort of got that in Chapter 4 by looking at her room. That's what assures me that she is going to be important in the rest of the game. But really, we'd love to meet her, even if it's not, an exact perfect version of her. And this is the perfect opportunity to do that. A hometown set in the past because it's about this case, Des's disappearance, through the lens of Asgore's rose-tinted glasses, and potentially we see that rosy lens fade away over the course of the chapter, and we are faced with the hard truth that even in the past, when we think things were great, they were in fact also, normal. Bad things still happened. Toriel and Asgore's marriage might not have been that great back then either. Maybe Rudy was still experiencing health problems, just not as severe, that kind of thing. Again, tying into this idea of escapism and how it sort of, grapples with reality. And yes, I think the plot of this chapter will be us following the events that lead up to Des's disappearance in the past, or at least a representation of them. And that's why I have on this slide, lost where the forest would grow, the children followed the pointed tail, or follow the pointed tail, whatever. Because where the forest would grow has always made me raise an eyebrow. A lot of people say, well, it's the shelter, right? A forest would grow there if not for the shelter existing. And okay, that makes some sense. But a forest is probably going to grow thanks to Asgore's Dark World, especially if it is hometown. Like, hometown is set in a big forest, right? So where the forest would grow, as in the forest is going to grow there soon or eventually in the future, in Chapter 5's Dark World, the children follow the pointed tail because we are following the events of what happened to Des, and it probably has something to do with whatever the hell friend is, right? So in Chapter 5, the children, as in the younger version of Des and Asriel, and probably maybe Chris and Noelle and Susie, are going to follow the pointed tail, and become lost. Like, we're going to find out what being lost means and what happened to Des. And I think that's Asgore's plan. GoldPro talks about Asgore having some sort of plan in Chapter 5, because in the Holiday Mansion cutscene with him, he talks about, finally proving it to everybody. The truth, like finding the truth, and then Tori will understand, and the whole town will understand why he had to do everything he did. And I know a lot of people think Asgore, killed a kid or something, like the vessel, because, again, it would tie into Undertale. But I personally think what he is talking about is either A, being careless and allowing Des to disappear, or B, being so obsessed with Des's case that he essentially drove everyone away from him, right? Especially if, again, if Toriel and Asriel are on this board, I can see why Toriel and him would have, arguments about this. Like, you can't really be treating your own family like they're criminals, like interrogating Asriel when he's so torn up because his best friend / probably love interest has just disappeared, probably forever. I can see that driving a wedge between Toriel and Asgore quite obviously. And I think his plan is to finally solve this case. Because clearly he's been to the Dark World before. He's got the Black Shard, which is something we get from the Knight. So Asgore's probably been there before, or at least knows about the Dark World. So if he creates this Dark World on purpose, why would he do that? Well, he's trying to recreate the events of the day Des disappeared so that he can figure out what happened. He's trying to solve the case once and for all. If he can find Des, then everything he's done, all of the, obsessive hours he's spent on this case will have been worth it. And everybody can be a family again because, the Holiday family would be back together. Plus, Asgore's on a time limit because Rudy's dying. If he can't find Des before Rudy dies, the family will never be able to be together again, right? So that all makes sense to me. But there is one big friend-shaped red flag left in the room to talk about. And that's the fact that after this board, we break through these hometown trees in the bottom right you see on this slide, and we go to the shelter and face Eram, which can summon Friend. And of course, if this is the chapter where the children follow the pointed tail, that's Friend's tail, right? More likely than not. So Friend has to be involved here in some capacity, right? And I do think Friend serving as the secret boss in this chapter does make a lot of sense. Eram is a representation of the actual monster in the shelter that probably disappeared Des. That monster is probably Friend? Probably. So what we're actually going to be fighting in this Dark World is not literally friend. It's like ERAM, but the real version of ERAM that this game is trying to represent with ERAM. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, all of the sprites in this game, the Mantle game, are representations of actual characters that we are going to meet, either in the Dark World or just in the Light World, right? So ERAM is a representation of friend. The real friend is in the shelter, but within Chapter 5's Dark World, we would be seeing a representation of friend, maybe also pieced together, just like Des is, by Asgore's evidence. Because, of course, the reason Asgore hasn't been able to solve this case is because a person didn't do it, right? Like, nobody helped Des run away, nobody stole her away. A monster that comes from beyond their reality swooped her into the code or something. And so the idea that all of his little pieces of evidence on his board, again, sort of like Mike's in the Dark World, little green Pippin's Mike, he's trying to figure out who the real Mike is, and it's almost assuredly friend. The idea that parallels the fact that Asgore's trying to figure out who the real culprit behind Des' disappearance is, and it's friend, but like nobody can figure out who this thing is because it's from beyond their understanding, right? But that all of these little pieces they've put together could create friend in aggregate, almost like, you know, you could call it an amalgamate or something in the Dark World. It's a very entertaining idea to me. That is the end of this video. A little bit shorter, maybe. I think it's probably still like half an hour at this point, right? Oh, 50 minutes. I shouldn't have said a little bit shorter. That's my bad. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you did enjoy, like and subscribe. And I'm sure you will leave me plenty of informative comments. If I missed anything, make sure to let me know. And who do you think everybody on this board is? Because I don't necessarily think my choices here are correct. I don't think anybody's will ever be. It's also abstract. It's like a Rorschach test. You see what you want to see, right? Obviously, I think Asgore's and Alphys's are pretty concrete. Other than that, well, actually, Des's is pretty concrete too. But other than that, it's really up in the air. So I'd be curious to know what you think. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye!